just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tankley, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
Michelle, today we thought we would talk about an article that you skeeted me on Blue Sky that was shared with you, I think, or you saw Nick Covington's post and reposted it. And we had so many words about it that I was like, this should probably be an episode, because just as I read through it and then revisited it, I couldn't help but there's so much here. We're going to post this article. It's called "What Do We Keep Getting Wrong in Education Policy?" It was actually from an August 2017 Pacific Standard article. So it's been around for quite a while, obviously new to you and I. And yeah, as we were digging in, it was like, oh, this is bringing up so much for both of us. So the first thing, just to give kind of a background of what the article kind of entails, follows the school Nathan Hale. And essentially this was a failing school. I think they even refer to it as like a dropout factory type of a school, really struggling. It gets turned around by splitting the big school into smaller school communities within the big school. And we actually had a school here in Colorado that did something a little bit similar called Castleview High School. And we knew the Mosaic Collective within Castleview. It might be interesting to revisit what we saw there as well. But essentially, it follows the school, Nathan Hale, that intentionally kind of made this move to take a big school and make it into smaller learning communities. They did a lot of other things. One, the principal of the school had total autonomy over the budget, which was huge. So it's a district school, but he wasn't getting kind of the mandate from the district of what the budget looked like. He had control over that. He also had control over his staff to be able to really give them autonomy and allow them to do some interesting things, and gave them the freedom to do all of that and have that agency within the school. And what ended up happening is the school had a complete turnaround where they, everyone was failing to, this is a standout school. And it really took notice on a more national stage. A lot of people came through to see what they were doing. And as often happens in education, they took one piece of what was going well, the small school, small class sizes, and they said, well, we should make every school small. And so the nation, the government, put a bunch of money into that smaller school model, as did the Gates Foundation put a ton of money into this model, kind of flooding, hoping that this was going to transform every school everywhere. And as the article goes on, that was not the outcome that happened. So I thought we would talk about that.
Sure. And I think it's important to say that Michael Hobbs wrote this, and I followed Michael Hobbs for quite a while.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And that Nathan Hale High School is in Washington State. And there's so much to be said about this. And I keep thinking back to, and I shared with you some analogies across a lot of things that I look at, like football is a really easy analogy for me to make. So my husband is a huge Raiders fan, and that goes over really well in Colorado, right? But the Raiders have struggled for a while. They've really struggled. They've gone through a lot of different coaching staffs. They've had quite a few quarterbacks. It's interesting how I keep looking at, in fact, they just fired their latest coach again, the most recent coach. And I like, obviously at some point when you keep firing coaches, that's not the problem.
Stop blaming the coaches.
Exactly. In some cases, maybe that is true. But when you see this pattern of we give a coach a year or two to build a system and then, it didn't work, fire him, start over, you're not going to get some miracle coach in there who's going to be the savior of that team and make that team better. The problem is systemic. It's not about a star quarterback, a star coach, a star running back. It's whatever. It is a systemic issue, and systems take a long time to rebuild. And in our society, we don't like time. We don't like anything that takes too long to show. We want results immediately. And that football analogy translates perfectly into school in that we don't give our systems enough time. We use the wrong metrics to measure whether we're seeing progress being made because we want instant results. And I think that when you look at some of these schools, so the ones that we've seen in Colorado, there was a high school in downtown Denver that also is referenced in that article. Same situation. They're like, oh, let's put in those small classes.
Manual High, which I think Manual High closed down. I don't think it's still there. Yeah.
But we keep looking at these quick fix issues and trying to take something and make it scalable. When look at the success in this school, we're going to do that for every school. Well, you're ignoring that the population is a different population, maybe. You're also ignoring everything that they did systemically. And in that article, they talk about it took 4 years to get to the place where they felt that they had success.
Well, and I think that's what stood out to me as well is you have these folks coming in and they look and see one metric and they kind of glom on to that idea and just make the assumption that this is what makes the difference. Because I think we're constantly looking for this magic bullet in education of like, what's going to be the thing that transforms everything. And as you said, we want the easy answer and we want the fast fix. The reality is schools are not efficient places because we're dealing in humanity. And what's upsetting to me as I read that article and in the examples that we've seen firsthand is when you've got these organizations coming in and looking at this, what they're not considering is the full picture. They're looking at one very specific piece. They're making all kinds of assumptions instead of taking the time to even begin to understand what has happened here that is making this work and is making this true. Because if you had asked the folks at Nathan Hale, the small school size, the smaller size was a component. It wasn't the full picture. Right. It was also the budget. It was also having, autonomy over the budget. It was also being able to meet with teachers the way that they were. They carved out 90 minutes once a week that teachers, everybody else had a late start, I think, or an early release, one of the two. And so the teachers had this time together where they could really be intentional about planning together and doing things as a small school community, which is something that we did as well at Anastasis. But when you just look and you're looking for what's the thing that worked and what would be an easy thing to like flip this switch and hope that it works, and small school size, small class size was that switch. And then it doesn't work because we haven't understood the problem correctly. We haven't framed the solution properly. And so we keep getting these kind of flash ups of things of it's maker spaces. Oh, it's STEM. Oh, it's this, or, there's all these things. And then we get into it a few years, project-based learning. We get into it a few years. It doesn't have the drastic shift that we think it should have. And so we pull all the money from it and then it collapses. It can't have any meaningful change because not only did it not have enough time, it didn't have the right structures around it, and now it doesn't have the funding that it needs to be successful.
There is no turnkey solution for a school.
Yeah.
Because
I 100% agree.
When you look at kids, like we love to talk about how unique children are. But then we turn around and we want to put them into a system where everything is standardized. We measure things the same. We deliver things the same. That doesn't work. If you just take even how many kids are visual learners, and I say this knowing I shouldn't say learners. I'm going to say visual processors.
Yes,
most people are visual processors. There is a smaller percentage of our population who are audio processors, right? And when they do that, they need to have things delivered to them differently than the kids who are more visual. And I say that again, that's a generalization. Nobody is 100% one thing or the other. However, just knowing that changes how I teach a kid to read. It changes how I deliver directions in the classroom. Those things alone, that's one tiny little part of the day, right? But I have to know every single student individually to be able to address those needs. You cannot standardize that because that's not how kids are.
And I think about one of the things that was so successful at Anastasis was that we did know the families really well. And so not only were we understanding who this kid is, but we were also starting to understand the dynamics of family structure, what mornings looked like, what drop off, all of these kind of pieces that are so easy to overlook in a school because it's not happening at school, but enormously impact what is happening at school. So we'd have kids, I don't want to go out for recess today, and they're just down and they're not kind of rallying. And then, one of the beauties of Anastasis is we knew that mom was going in for surgery and we're probably a little nervous about how that's going. And so we could put in these moments of, well, let's check in by text, or let's, see if we can call dad and check in about how it went. Or like there were all of these hidden structures that we could put into place, not only because we knew the kids, but because we knew what the community dynamics that were happening beyond school as well. And that is hard to do. It was hard enough to do in a small school. I can't imagine trying to understand all of those components in a larger school.
The human factor, the human condition is something that you cannot plan for, that you can't be reactive as well. I mean, you have to you go with it, right?
Yeah.
And when I look again at how the expectation of our society that we have on children, that they're going to be compliant, that they are going to learn what we tell them to learn, that they should ignore what they're interested in and do exactly what we tell them. And this is what you have to know. All of those things completely
and that they
ignores.
should ignore their biology of how they're feeling.
When they have to go to the bathroom.
When they have to go to the bathroom. Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? All of those things.
Yes.
We really tell them to be stripped down versions of a whole person as soon as they come in schools.
And fortunately, there are a lot of schools and a lot of teachers who recognize that they are in a system that requires that part of them, but they can help fill in, right? But not every kid is lucky enough to have that.
I was going to say the best teachers are kind of intuitively do some of that, right? That it's like they know intuitively, but we can't count on that every teacher is going to have that skill or the capacity
or
in
the time
any given
or the permission, right? I do know that, I have a lot of friends who said that they would sneak food to kids who they knew weren't getting any food, but it was against the rules in their school to provide any nourishment for the kids. And I think, okay, well, that's great that there are some people who will do that, but the fact that it's against the rules to give kids food if they're hungry, that again tells me that we've got some really systemic issues with how we view kids. I have said this before. I feel like there's a lot of disrespect and even in some people contempt for children, that we just hurry up and grow up so we can get on with what you're supposed to be doing. And I know that not everybody feels that way, but that is kind of the message that we send to kids. If we put them into, here's your day, here's your schedule, this is what you're going to do. You have to ask permission before you can even sharpen your pencil, any of those kind of things, right? We don't trust you. We're going to set all of the rules for the least common denominator. And we're going to assume that you're going to do things wrong. All of these, I know we talked about rules in previous episodes. There are a lot of do not that we give to kids. And so they're now in the system that has basically told them from the second you walk in, here's what is expected of you. Here's how we're going to control your day. And then after they leave that system, we expect them to know how to act like an adult, to make independent choices. And they've never had that option.
When they can't.
Exactly. And then we make fun of them for living in their parents' basement, which again, I'm like, can we just not have so much contempt for the system that we created that put the kids in that situation, right?
Contempt for the system instead of the people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we can go back to, these are human beings who deserve to be treated as human beings from day one, from second one. We don't need to assume that they're going to do things wrong. Let's help them by seeing who they are. And you can't see who they are when they are stuck in a system where they're basically plug and play.
Yep.
So how do we move past that?
Well, and it struck me too that as, all of these schools closed within years of opening or went back to the old way, it struck me that it said no one took the time to understand why it didn't work. And isn't that just the picture of what happens in education? I started digging to look at what we spend on research and development and education. In the United States, it's less than 1% on research and development specific to education. We spend 51% on R&D in military and defense. Education is the smallest piece of the pie. And then I thought this was interesting as well, within research and development in education, 62% is basic research, 28% is applied research. And you think about applied research would have really been useful here.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing, first of all, what Nathan Hale and schools like it were doing and comprehensively understanding what they were doing instead of making assumptions and running with that assumption.
Right.
And then 10% is experimental development. And it breaks my heart as we're seeing schools in Colorado, very innovative, super interesting models in Colorado. We're one of them, closing in the next year. And a lot of them, it's money related. Funding has run out or whatever has happened there. For us, it's obviously a building is elusive. A building that meets code, I should say, is elusive. And so, but what breaks my heart about that is here we have these super interesting models. Some of them have been going, 6, 7 years. Some of them are 3 or 4 years old. We're 13 years old. There hasn't been focused research and development done in tandem with any of us to capture the rich learning that we have, which I think is part of why you and I decided to do this, is how do we capture more of the story and holistically capture it so that you and I don't forget and it doesn't just go away with us as well. But no one spent time to understand why the early pilots worked. And then we didn't spend the time to understand why the other ones failed. And so it's on either end, we never asked the right questions. We never looked at the problem framed correctly. And we just made a bunch of assumptions. And now the good that was there that could have been learned from these models is gone. And what not to do is also lost to a large extent because we didn't ask why didn't it work. I think we can make assumptions. We can take educated guesses about why they didn't work. There was some examples in the article of schools that took on this money because when somebody's offering money, you take it. And so took on this money, did the smaller class size or the smaller school, break the large school into smaller schools. But there was no intention around how it was done. And so it was literally, that was the only component that changed. Nobody took the time to slow down and look at it. The schools that did take time to slow down and be really intentional about what they were doing, how it was rolling out, how they were working with staff, lost funding before the metrics could come in.
Right.
And then the metrics that they were looking at, as far as Gates Foundation and some of these other grants that were being put towards this, they were looking at score outcomes. So again, it wasn't a comprehensive look at our kids. Is there less discipline? Which is mentioned in the article, that there was less discipline in these schools that had more focused attention. Okay, well, that makes sense to me. Now that we're paying attention to what's actually happening, we can support kids differently. But that wasn't a metric that was being looked at by these foundations. They were looking at one very specific thing: is did we move the needle on test scores without, one, giving it time, and two, without understanding what other things were contributing that in the long run probably would have changed the metric they were looking at.
Right. Attendance was one that I noted in that article too, that you had, a school that had a lot of attendance issues, and now all of a sudden kids wanted to be in school. We found that even our very first year, kids wanted to be in school. And that was such...
They'd be so mad when mom and dad made an ortho appointment in the middle of the day.
Right?
Why are you picking me up?
Or that we had to have a spring break or summer break. Kids cried on the last day of school. And I remember standing there going, I don't understand what's happening right now. Right. Because I'd never seen, again, there were kids who were glad to have the break and that they would be going on vacation or they get to have, sleep in or whatever. But they're like, I'm sad that I don't get to see my friends every day. I'm sad that we don't get to learn every day with you.
It's the community they know, right? And they love that community. And so, why wouldn't you? I remember we had a handful that came through your class too that would say it's Friday, it's the weekend, And it's well, you might not need a break, but I need a break. Right. So it's just interesting how they're kind of intangibles. They're things that are very noticeable from the ground when you're in the school. But when you're not asking that question or you're not looking at that data, it becomes you're less able to see it.
Well, and that is a huge piece there, because I think that we've experienced that with our own school boards. We've been very fortunate to have supportive school boards. However, many of them on the board still did not understand what was happening. And we had one of our school board members who came in, actually became a staff member. And that person said, wow, I get it now after being with us. And it was so, for me, it was kind of like, just reassuring that, okay, Summa does get it, but you cannot go in and try to do any kind of metrics in a school if you do not immerse yourself there long enough to see what's the culture like, what's engagement like, what's happening on a day-to-day basis that's making this be successful or not successful.
Right.
And it cannot just be test scores. And in fact, in most places, the test scores are not going to measure what you think they're measuring.
Well, they also tell the smallest part of the story. And in my opinion, the least interesting part of the story.
Right.
Because what I would like to know more than are they passing the test is how much growth did this child show in their own understanding, in their, I don't care if they're grade level. I want to know like what personal success have they seen?
Right.
And in all the metrics, not just academics. And again, it's the smallest part of the story, the test score, because it was literally a singular moment in time, snapshot that doesn't take into account, did they have a good breakfast? Were they upset with a sibling on the way to school? Are they coming down with something and feeling not their best? Did they sleep well? We don't know most of the story of that moment in time. It's interesting data to capture, and it's the one that we've become so dang obsessed with.
Well, and that's when you look back too, is that, okay, everyone assumed that the smaller class size was the panacea for those large schools. Okay, so then they created smaller academies within the schools. How they divided those kids also made a huge difference. At Nathan Hale, it was a very diverse division.
Equitable. They did it intentionally equitable, that there was a mix of kids, of demographics, the whole thing.
And in other schools, that was the exact opposite of what they did.
It became a new way to segregate.
And it was exclusive for a lot of kids. It reinforced stereotypes and old tropes about who learns and who doesn't learn. If you constantly remove your highest ability learners from your classrooms, those schools are always going to look like they're successful. And now and who gets the resources? Yeah. So it's really an interesting, again, when you look across the board of the schools in that particular article, the preparation leading into the smaller academies is the piece that was missing from so many of them. And the decisions that they made.
And the intentionality behind the decisions.
They set them up to fail.
Because they all paid them to fail, essentially. They also were not thinking intentionally about what would a smaller school community, learning community, what would that look like? What would that change for us? How would we orient that so that it works? It was literally a move done for the dollar amount. And being the one in charge of a budget, I understand that impulse. I'm also sometimes so grateful we did not start with any funding like that, because a lot of these schools in Colorado that we're currently seeing close, it's because foundation funding has run out or has changed, and it's no longer, they haven't figured out how to make it sustainable without that funding. One of the benefits we had because of the way we structured and decided we're going to play with the same money as per pupil expenditure. Obviously, we're getting that differently through tuition, but our budget was about $500,000 to $600,000 a year, depending on the year. Looking at that, you have to make really intentional decisions about where things are going to go, how money is going to be spent, what you're going to value with those dollars, because it's not an endless supply. I look at so many schools who either get big foundation money because they're trying to push STEM or project-based or makerspace, whatever it might be, and then that goes away. And it's like, well, now we have this space that we don't know how to continue using, or we have this curriculum that is not supported in the same way as it was, or some of these things. And so we put these practices into place, but then we don't create a way that they can be sustainable. And I see that both in private and public. It's not only in public schools, right? The private schools that are getting this foundation money, it's equally hard because when you don't have to figure out how to sustain it apart from that, there's never a way to really solve that. I shouldn't say never. There's probably ways to solve that in reverse. I don't see many schools figuring that out.
Right. That also shows in a lot of public schools as initiatives. And I know that there are a lot of teachers that, especially if they've taught for any length of time, can tell you, oh yeah, there's always a new initiative. There's always something coming down the pike. And we want to make sure that we don't give too much attention to it because it's going to be here and gone tomorrow.
Well, it's why the buy-in's so hard. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, again, that I go back to at that Nathan Hale High School, that the principal spent 4 years really ensuring that he had the staff buy-in. And if he didn't, he hired new staff.
Yep.
Worked with the staff to show here's what we are going to be intentional about. Here's what we're going to focus on. These are the things we want to make sure that we're small, not because it's easier to teach 12 kids, but it's about creating that community and the culture so that the kids know that you care about them, that you're understanding where they're coming from. I mean, all of that.
Well, and he invited the teacher voice in.
Yes. It wasn't a top down.
No, it was bottom up. They were doing those Saturday sessions where they just have paper all over the walls and, those, like, what do we care about? What are we going to value? What are we going to, which is exactly what we did at Anastasis. It wasn't, I had ideas coming in, but it was really co-created, not just among us and staff, but also with the kids and with families. Right. And sometimes that made it so messy and hard. Right? When a family came in and had an agenda that was not ours, it made it really hard some years to either protect what we intuitively knew was right, or to figure out what could that look like? How could that work within our framework? So no, it's not efficient. It's not easy. It's not any of those things, but it's also worth the work that we put in.
The teacher buy-in, when we had staff who understood, and again, it was a huge learning curve to come into Anastasis, and everything you ever learned about teaching, maybe depending on what your background was, might have been flipped upside down, right?
And we were willing to question it. Yes. So even if it didn't get flipped upside down, we were very willing to say, well, what if that's not true?
Right.
Which I don't think happens everywhere.
No, and it takes a person who is flexible, willing to be vulnerable, willing to say, I don't know how to do that. And that's very hard to do. So I'm not judging the people that we've had on our staff, but there were definitely people who automatically fit well, and others that it was a struggle for them. And that changes the culture when you don't have buy-in from everyone. And we've seen that in other schools, other colleagues and peers that we have, where they really believed in a model and they had to deal with a lot of backbiting by other staff members. And it ultimately poisons the water, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it really makes it a struggle to take something that is different and get enough support when you have all of those other forces kind of working against you.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do, but I keep thinking that every time we've had a really good school year, it isn't because we've had kids who were just really easy to work with. It isn't because we had, top learners or anything that you might hear in another school. It was because the culture was working the way that we expected it and wanted it to and planned for it to.
Built it for, yeah.
Absolutely.
Designed for. It's so well said, because we have had years where COVID made hiring really hard.
Right.
There were just times when hiring's hard right now. If I had to hire teachers today, it would take time, right? It's going to be more of a challenge. The first year, it felt like everybody just came to us and it worked out great. We haven't had a year like that since year one. So to look at really how are we building culture strong enough that when those new staff come in, we have enough OG or enough who have shared the journey together of why decisions got made, I think was really important for us, because, you being there since the get-go, you could say, well, remember we tried it this way, or we talked about, or this was the evolution of our thinking. And it could kind of, that history of why decisions got made could be carried as a through line, which I think doesn't always happen in schools. And especially when you've got enormous staffs, that makes it harder.
Right.
And in a lot of schools I've been in, it can be like hard, the newcomers coming in, and it's like the older are like, well, we're not going to change the guard now. This is how it is. Don't ask questions. It's just what I loved about what we were able to do is, one, keep the through line, but while it's still inviting the conversation, the questions, the pushback, the whatabouts, some of those pieces. And it was a balance.
Well, and every year you have, even though you might have the same kids, and I know we've talked about this before in several episodes, every year is different. Every child coming into you has grown in ways, even if you had them the previous year. Things happen. Events take place in families that are unexpected. And so you're working with families and with children to handle and process some of those things. You have new kids coming in there. So every year is a little bit different. We have to keep going back to our staff. Okay, what do these kids need? The ones who are in front of us right now, what do they need?
What I wish that somebody would fund is us. And what I wish somebody would fund is the intentionality behind designing for a community, then allowing teaching how do you design for a community, and then allowing that process to happen, like you said, with enough time, with enough intention, and with enough flexibility to really see what is it that we're doing, and measuring a broader set of metrics to say to the school leaders, to the teachers, what have you noticed has happened? Is this working or not? Rather than let us tell you what we're looking for, and then we'll tell you if it's working or not. It really needs to be trusting the people in the building to say, we tried this didn't work. We tried this, and this is going well, and here's how we've seen it go well. And I've not seen anybody who's done that at scale from a grant-making foundation, like any of those. I've not seen it go that way.
Even the Department of Education programs for public schools, a lot of times when they're looking at what's working in a public school, it's not always taking in all of the metrics that matter, and instead focusing on, well, how did the test scores come out? I mean, we constantly listen to people talk about how our schools are failing, and our schools are not failing. We educate every student in the United States.
They're drowning.
They're drowning. Absolutely.
Yes,
they're not failing. They're not failing. Yeah. And when you have to look at a system that, again, based on efficiency, that is required to educate every student in the United States, that's a huge undertaking. So what could we do to make those systems better for the kids? That's messy. It needs I shouldn't say it needs a lot of money. It needs proper resources. And we already know that a lot of money gets thrown, again, as you were saying before, with foundations for private and independent schools. But on the public side too, it's those initiatives that great, you found this new thing that's going to come in and save the world. Right now, it might be, it's AI, right? We've already had that conversation. I'm not going to go there again. However, we cannot continue to pour money on things just because they're new and shiny. Michael Hobbs talks about that in his article from 2017. And we've also mentioned that when we're looking for innovation, people look at innovation as new. And not as something that has been challenging a system and successful over time. That's still innovative. But because we love the new and shiny things, we don't want to fund those things.
And we tend not to look at smart recombinations. I think that's a Stephen Johnson term.
Yes.
But like those, we're taking these different ideas and we're combining them in new ways is also innovation. When people look at that, often when I'm talking with people, they're like, well, so-and-so does that. And I'm like, cool. Do they do it like we do? Probably not. Right. And it's not that I don't make me compete against somebody else doing it. What I want to tell you is when I've done it in this way and combined it with these other things, it's worked really well. And I'd love to be able to tell that story. And I'd love to be able to, exist long enough to continue doing that. And again, the research and development piece, I think, is so important. but we're not looking in the right places. We're not asking the right questions. We're not capturing the right metrics to tell the whole story. If you only told the story of Nathan Hale in 2017, it doesn't look good. It looks like it's gone back to failing. The parts of that story that won't be told, that got told in this article, are, well, the autonomy over the budget went back to the district. Right. And so now, they're deciding that the school needs a turf field and a new lobby that makes it look shiny. And meanwhile, the teachers are like, yeah, but we turn off the heat at 3:15 every day because we can't afford to heat the school. And so when you don't have the fullness of what is that story, the other part of that story is, and we saw this at Anastasis, when you get good at seeing kids and helping kids, they're going to bring you the hardest kids. Because those families are the ones who are like, we need the most support. And so you're going to get more of those kids showing up at your door than the ones who could go anywhere. Well, the problem with that is when the money shifts, you can no longer support having that large of a population. And so proportionately to the other schools in the area, they had so many more of that population, but not more resources to support that population. So there were all these other components. They also talked about, in that time frame, race to the top, standardization, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, all these other pieces were also framing what could happen. And so we weren't looking just at smaller schools or smaller class sizes. There were other things pushing in and impacting that for everybody, Nathan Hale included. So when you say like, well, it didn't work over time, it failed for them too. Well, yes, but all of the metrics changed. And so you can't blame that on the one that you are focused on.
Mm-hmm. Part of me hears the buts when it comes to education. There have been schools in the past who have underserved their population because they weren't being held accountable for teaching kids to read or whatever. I totally get that. However, again, instead of addressing the issue with that particular school or that set of schools, right? We have now said, well, we're just going to make laws and we're going at the federal and state level to make sure that doesn't happen. So now you have basically taken away the autonomy from every school that might have been doing really great innovative things, or even if I take the word innovation out of the equation, they were doing things that met the needs of their students. So we've now basically handcuffed them, and there's still kids whose needs aren't being met, but all we've done is changed what the targets are. And we've talked again about, well, we want kids to start reading when they're 5. That standard did not exist several years ago. It is now a standard in most states that kids have to be reading in kindergarten, which is so out there that who's developing these ideas?
I'll tell you who, somebody who's not in a classroom with 5-year-olds.
Because I do know that there are a lot of educators who get involved in writing standards. Sometimes they forget what it's like to be in a classroom.
Or I think part of it is sometimes you've got those standout classes where you're like, any 5-year-old can do this. I watched these 5-year-olds do it. The problem is you're talking about one community of children who may be upper middle class and have access to all kinds of books at home and have access to Sesame Street and all the things, right?
Food, water,
Food, water, all the things.
Right.
And then you look, and then you're trying to put what worked in that school in place for every student, as if that is every 5-year-old's experience and every teacher's experience of kids. And the reality is that's not going to work. You have to have people in the trenches, so to speak, who are designing for the communities in front of them. And somehow we have to have more frictionless schools where we're trusting the people there. It just has to look different. We can't evaluate them. Some of those schools shut down because the evaluation of the teachers changed, right? The Nathan Hale evaluation of teachers changed, so they couldn't work together. It went from being very horizontal evaluation of peer-to-peer and the administrators and the people working together every day to this vertical top-down look at how teachers are doing. And it fundamentally changed how the school could operate. And that was one piece of what was happening. But I think about how many places that's true of even how teachers are being evaluated. And so now all these constraints and lack of trust and lack of flexibility, lack of autonomy, lack of ability to design for the actual community we're showing up and serving, the people who are most likely to understand that community. And we're outsourcing all of it to people who have never met that community.
And again, this is not a product. We're not trying to, build something that comes out looking exactly the same every single time. And that is how a lot of our systems are built. We've talked a lot about a portrait of a graduate of anastasis. And I know a lot of schools, public schools, private schools, who have done the same thing in their school districts from K through 12. And
ours is called DNA of an anastasis graduate. Just want to point out.
Right. But there are some of those that are very much, we want all of our graduates to look like this. And to me, it takes all the humanity out of who those individuals are. They will all have had, this many years of a different language. They will have this many years of math and this many years of English and social studies and so on and so forth. I'm like, that should be like, bare minimum of, well, yeah, we want them to have some of those things, but is that really what each individual kid, it goes back to like the law of averages, right? When you design for average, you're not meeting anybody's needs.
Yeah. You've effectively designed for nobody.
For a human being that doesn't actually exist. And we've discussed that in like when you design a seat for a pilot in an airplane, right? How the law of averages can't actually be used there because nobody is average.
Yeah, that's from Todd Rose's book, The End of Average, for anyone who's interested.
So when you look at children, and every kindergartner, preschooler, all the way up through a senior in high school and beyond, there's no standard that I could look at to say, well, every single kid absolutely needs to do that, because that ignores what that individual person needs.
Yeah.
And so if I, again, trying to fill these little receptacles so that they can get stamped on the head to say, okay, approved, you can go out and be an adult now because you've done the things we've told you need to do. It comes back down to a lot of our peers has often said that, anastasis is a unicorn, but it's also probably pretty chaotic, right? And I'm like, well, define, what do you mean chaotic? Well, if every kid gets to choose what they're learning, I'm like, that's not how that works. And that's not what we're doing. It isn't just a free for all. Please go learn what you'd like and come back and show us. That's not how that is. But it's also a deeper understanding of what learning and knowledge is.
And it's a co-creation.
Yes.
I was writing, and I know we've told this story, but I was writing about it yesterday for the book that I'm putting together, about that student or the class that first had you for math and was, all kinds of math trauma, math anxiety, hated it every day. You put a new framework around math, and suddenly it was, like we could engage it. There were no tears. There were no visits to the office with stomach aches every day. It turned out fine. What was interesting was the parents coming in saying, well, I'm really worried that they're never doing math. It's like, well, it's not accurate. But then in the next class, the teacher being able to build on what you had done with that student, and in the Who We Are inquiry block was reading Out of My Mind. And the kids had said, well, I don't think I know anybody like the main character, Melody, in the story. I don't think I've ever met somebody with special needs or like who couldn't, didn't have control over their body or whatever. And the teacher assigned that as a class read, didn't anticipate this conversation coming up, but then responded to this conversation by saying, well, you should, you're the age 10, 11, 12, you should have people in your lives who are different than you. And so she very intentionally went and said, our service partner, I don't care who they are, but they need to serve this community. Then they go serve this community. The whole point of it was, let me expose you to a wider worldview. That community also has a food bank. And so the kids were working on Thanksgiving boxes and found out they were going to be 25 short. And this student suddenly uses all of this very complex math understanding and language to say, I want to solve this problem.
Right.
I want to be part of solving this problem. Again, the teacher gives permission in that moment and says, how do you think we could solve it? So it's this whole interplay of this, like we've said, living curriculum where they're co-creating it in real time.
Right.
That is so hard to tell somebody who's giving me money the magic that just happened there because it doesn't fit neatly into a damn test. And so it's like, I don't know how you design that better. I've been part of a participatory grant making process. It was super interesting where a group of us were given $25,000 and there were no parameters on it. So we got to decide how we were going to grant this money. We got to act as the grant making group. And what was interesting about that is how we thought about who is it that we want to raise up and amplify the work that they're doing. So what parameters, what values do we have as a group that we want to, whatever we bring to the group, we want to make sure that it amplifies these values that are shared. And then it was, who do we know doing really incredible work that we want to give money? We know that this amount of money is going to meaningfully impact the work that they're able to do. But let's not put any parameters around it. Let's not even tell them that they have to apply for it. Because by doing those things, you're already creating tension in that relationship of, now I have to jump through a hoop, or I have to dedicate time, or I have to dedicate resources towards getting this and applying for it, and then all the follow-up and proof that it was worth giving to me. And we said, in our community, we know people who are doing incredible work in these nonprofits, and the nonprofits, and we trust the people that if they have an extra $5,000, they're going to do something tremendous with it. And so we had the ability to look and vote as a group of us for who do we want to amplify. The cool thing about that process is after we gave money, which that was the most fun money ever to give, is somebody else's, and to somebody who doesn't know that they're getting money, was so cool. But what was neat about that process is those people then entered the same participatory grant. So those who received money were then looking in their networks of people, and they gave the next 25,000 and made the decisions about how that was going to work. Super powerful. I don't know how you do that at scale, but I wish it was happening at scale, because when you have communities seeing others doing really good work, how do you help amplify that in ways that are less constrictive? I think it's the late Steve Jobs' wife, who has the frictionless grant making and did the XQ project and has others that she's done. But she really is a strong believer in how do we create a process that's as frictionless as possible. So she too doesn't have anybody you can't apply for the grant. It's just given. You don't know even who's really getting it. And then the least amount of metrics of what they did with it so that you're not impacting the thing. It's also, it almost reminds me, I know we're both reading quantum physics things right now, but it reminds me of like the nature of, if you look at it, it fundamentally changes. And so I think about sometimes when we're looking so specifically at something, it fundamentally changes how the school or community is interacting in a way that was probably unintended.
All of that makes me think too about how deeply wrong our funding system is. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't begrudge anyone for getting grant money. In fact, obviously that's something that we need.
We would love it.
Right. But I just know like all of the times that I've had to write grants when I was a public school teacher. And I keep thinking like we are basically at the mercy of somebody's whim. Right. And how that's.
And almost of it almost feels like a secret society where there are rules that I've never been taught as I'm pitching foundations,
right?
For the last 6 months and getting nowhere and going, somebody understands how this works and it's clearly not me.
Right.
And I just keep getting told, well, you just keep talking with them and it's like, okay, but at some point I'm trying to do the work. At some point, I'm the only one doing the work right now. That's not what you're asking of a founder is not really reasonable.
And again, at some point, especially the largest foundations, they are kind of fickle. And if something new and shiny, again, to use those terms, comes up, they'll pull funding from one that they've maybe gone into, similar to the Nathan Hale situation, and move on to something else. So you can't ever depend upon the money that you're getting.
The number of times I've been told, well, we don't give to things like you because we give to the new thing. And I'm going, if I can't survive, there's no reason to put money into the new thing, because until you figure out how to make it sustainable, that you're going to end up in this same cycle,
right,
all the time.
And looking for funding for things that are sustainable or that can, and it goes back to our conversation earlier about you can't keep hiring a new coach or a new quarterback or whatever because the system is the problem. So if we are working to address and change a system to meet the needs of the kids in front of us, and we're able to do that and sustain it, that should be funded. Now, I'll take it back another step. What if, instead of relying on the benevolence of a foundation or an individual, we just properly funded all schools?
Wouldn't that be incredible?
Wouldn't that be great? I know that that should not be just a wish. That shouldn't be something that we laugh about and say, ha ha, good thinking. What if we were able to look at the way that we fund education and say, it's not equitable. It's not someone's decision of what's working and what's not, whether they have the expertise to know that or not. And it deeply creates a lot of gaps in who is the have and who is the have not. So when we look at how all of this applies across the country, if we were able to adequately fund, and I don't just mean like barely get by so that we don't have to worry about whether we turn the heat off at 3:15 or not. And again, I drive by schools all the time and used to back in Omaha where I left, where they have a brand new football field. And I'm not going to say that schools shouldn't have football fields, but if those are the new things that get funded, and yet we've got textbooks books.
I know. And are we asking the right questions of what will meaningfully change the life of this community?
Right.
This school community, these kids. And I'm sorry, it's not a football field. It's not. And I don't think, I'm with you. It's not that it's wrong to have a football field, but that is not what we're doing. It cannot be how things are working.
I'll tell you, there are a lot of people who truly believe, well, but the football team in the school or the drama department, they are revenue raising. They sell tickets. And
I hear this argument a lot. And I've not seen it proved.
Right. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And how is that improving the test scores in that school? Because that's the metric that you're using to measure how this school gets funded, right?
Yeah.
It's not. Right. For a lot of kids, all those extracurriculars, and I'm one of them, those kept kids in school, right? They gave kids a reason to go to school. I'm not saying we should get rid of those things. But when the funding is so completely lopsided that you really don't, kids are getting turned down for special education resources because there's not enough funding to have every kid who needs to have those resources.
We've got this really cool new turf football field that some kids get to enjoy.
Right. Oh, but they raise revenue.
Yeah.
And where does that revenue go exactly?
Exactly. It goes right back into the same program. Again, it's one of those things that I think had good intentions.
Absolutely. Yep.
I don't think we've asked the right questions around any of it to really understand. Number one, what message are we sending to the community and to our kids through these decisions? And then how is it making it work for every single person in that community? And if it's not, we need to ask better questions.
Yeah. And even because I know that this has been an issue for a lot of schools, you have to care that every kid gets the equitable education that they are entitled to.
I know. I just take for granted that that's true, but I know it's not.
Right. There are some communities that are perfectly fine with dismissing kids because, well, it's okay that they don't graduate high school, or it's okay that they don't get the education that they're supposed to because, what's going to happen to them anyway? It's a waste of our time and resources. And if you believe that about a child, then I don't know how else to reach
leave
you.
education now.
Or maybe you take your voice out of what needs to happen in education because...
Or perhaps spend time with those that you're dismissing. That would be a great place for the teacher swap that we did, where everybody taught in somebody else's classroom, just as an empathy builder of like, what is the community you're willing to give less money to? And that's the community you spend time, within your own school. But those are the kids or the community that you spend time with for the next 6 months. And then let's have a conversation again about how money gets spent.
It's not acceptable. I mean, there's no other word that I can think of. It's just not acceptable that we allow in a country with the resources that we have, that we allow some children to not become their best selves, that we make excuses.
And that we make assumptions about what they're capable of.
Right.
If for anybody who's not listened to the telepathy tapes, it's another podcast and I'm a little obsessed with it. But if ever you're wondering, about a part of your school community and you're thinking, well, that they're limited in what they can do, I'm here to tell you firsthand, because we've experienced it. It's just not true. And when you hear and see evidence of how very untrue it is, we're just not doing the best that we can.
Well, and there are a lot of naysayers and critiques of the telepathy tapes, and I'm willing to entertain those. My point is, you don't get to assume something about a child just because of a diagnosis. You don't get to assume of any
about
kid.
Another person.
Exactly. Right. I'm always going to assume that the potential to learn is there, that there are no limitations on that. Over time, we've seen when we don't put limits on kids, they always surpass even what we quietly expected, right?
Uh-huh.
And that is the part.
We have kids that later, I was pretty intentional about not looking at it when we accepted the student I'm thinking of as part of our community. I knew that she was capable because I had a conversation with her. If I had only looked at her on paper, her IQ is such that she shouldn't have been able to have that conversation with me, let alone all of the incredible things. Never have I met a harder worker. I mean, when you saw what was really happening and she felt safe enough and had the means to communicate it and knew that the people in her life were going to trust that it was incredible. But if you had only looked on paper, you would have immediately limited in your mind what the capability was. In any other, we didn't have a separate special ed classes of any kind. And so it was always inclusion at Anastasis. But in any other school, she would have been in a SPED program separated out for most of her day.
Well, and again, we can go back to a lot of times IQ tests are very biased. They don't tell us the whole story. It goes back to everything that we're saying about testing, how important it is for us to be able to get to know each student, to know the things that they think are their strengths, the things that are interesting to them. And we start there. Yeah. And we move forward, every single kid. And again, a lot of times that even though we go into it trying not to have any preconceptions, we still do. We're human.
Sure.
But all of these kids over the last 14 years, I look at every single student that's gone through our school and think, I know something special about each one of them. Mm-hmm. I know there are things that they've done that have surprised me in such a good way that I love being surprised by kids showing me things that they didn't even know they could do at one point when they first come to us. And then all of a sudden, wow, they are doing it. That is not just an Anastasis thing. That's not because we have this magic formula that we're not going to share with other people. It's because we have built a culture where we know our kids.
Right.
And we allow them to be themselves.
And the decisions we made were started there.
Yeah.
And people have heard us say, I do believe that schools should be smaller. I believe that should be true. I do believe classes should be smaller. I believe that that should be true everywhere. And I don't think that's the only thing that is going to make it work. As we've talked, it creates the enabling conditions by which other things that we've talked about are possible. The way that we did assessment was possible because we could sit beside kids and do it together. The way that we co-created curriculum was possible because we were small and agile and didn't have a top-down kind of methodology. We were able to do culturally the things that we could do and be intentional about how we built culture because we were small enough to do it intentionally. So small was a component. It wasn't the component.
And as you mentioned with being agile, knowing when something wasn't working, whether it was system-wide in our school or in the class or even just the one-on-one, we could talk about it and say, okay, this isn't working. What can we do differently? And having the permission, the autonomy, the flexibility, the vulnerability to be able to do all of that.
And coworkers who would come in and rally. I mean, made a huge difference as well. And that part of that was our smallness. But it was also how we did professional development, where it wasn't focused on the newest shiny thing in education. It was focused on how do we get to know each other as a staff, build that camaraderie, build the collaboration, build our own culture so that we could do this with kids. Anytime I'm invited to do PD somewhere, I'm like, you're not going to like how I do it, because my entire focus is going to be how do we build collaboration and camaraderie among your people, because until that exists, nothing else that I do is going to matter, really.
This isn't how to teach this one unit better or how to approach inquiry learning, for example, because that in and of itself is a big step up. It has to come back down to exactly the way that we teach the kids. I need to get to know you as a peer, as a colleague. I need to know what kind of things are important to you. I need to know how you function best. What happens when you have a crisis in your life? Are you going to be able to feel comfortable coming to us and saying, I'm having a crisis right now? All of the things that we say we want to do for the families in our school and for the kids, we also have to do with our staff. And if you go into your building as a teacher and you feel like you're a cog in the wheel and that nobody really cares why you were a minute late today, that you're just getting judged because you weren't in the door. They just
care because you were a minute late. Yeah.
All of those things add up to, well, I don't matter. So when you feel like you don't matter, you're going to do the bare minimum, right? When you're appreciated, when you're seen, when you're valued, you always want to do your best or whatever you're capable of doing that day, because that is the expectation that you're going to be a human being.
But also to know that when you're not showing up as your best, the rest of us will step in to help you. Makes a huge difference. The number of times, you all called down and were like, I just need somebody to come and be with these kids for 15 minutes so I can regroup.
Right.
And that's okay. Knowing that that was a safe thing to do, knowing that you could tap out and we would tap in, or like, I've got this thing that is unexpected and it's come up, and having a staff of teachers who would go, no problem, we're going to figure it out. We've got your kids. We've got you. Don't think about it again. When we had deaths in our community, when we had like all of these just real life things that happen, we rallied in ways that I've never seen in another community. But again, it started because we were intentional about seeing each other, getting to know each other, making that a priority, doing it with the kids, doing it with the families. And yes, being small helped.
It also helps when you aren't pulling your weight. I shouldn't say pulling your weight. That's not really what I mean. If there's something that in a situation where I wasn't doing something the best that I could, I'm losing words here. Essentially, I didn't ever feel like I was being called out. I was being called in. So if there was something that I could be doing better, or, hey, did you notice that
That's
your
a really
voice,
good way to say it.
Did you notice your voice was going up in a way that sounded really like full of tension? And if it came from somebody who I know valued me, I can accept that in a way that's much different than somebody who I'm worried is going to be checking something off that I'm not doing right. So that whole level of trust, along with the autonomy, I can feel called in to improve when I know
that horizontal,
yes,
right? Versus
right.
the vertical.
And even if it's not 100% horizontal, right? If you're walking through my classroom one day and you're like, hey, Michelle, did you notice this was, and I'm like, oh no, I didn't notice that. I trust you. And I know that you trust me. So this isn't a gotcha moment. But again, that's that whole culture of collaboration. And why are we here? What are we doing for students? It's not just
I think we saw ourselves as, for lack of a better term, like co-parent. We were co-parenting all of these people, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't helpful for me to get you in a moment, right? Because our entire purpose of being there is that we're raising kids together. We're helping build these learners up together. And that works better when we're all on the same page, when we're working together, when we're saying the same things, when we're supporting each other. So I think part of that is just the value that we all shared. We recognized that we shared it. And so there's no reason for, me to call you out or for somebody to call you out, because it's like, well, I'm going to benefit. We all benefit when this goes better. And the same thing would happen with me. You guys would walk in and say, like, you look like you need chocolate. You look like something needs to change here. Or you would tap in when I couldn't do it anymore with a kid. And you would say, I'm going to step in and I will sit with them and I will work it out with them, and you go take. So it wasn't just you all, it was also what you did for me. And
that's part of that culture
as well.
So in that article that we referenced at the beginning, I remember reading that one of the things that changed after they made all of that headway, the smaller communities, and then they kind of slipped back into how things were before. Not only did administration lose autonomy for budgeting, but they stopped doing the way that they would do the horizontal type of peer coaching, and evaluations changed, and those administrator visits changed also. They were no longer always in the classrooms. It was they stop by, do a formal observation and leave. I know for a fact that in every school I've ever been in before Anastasis, when there was an administrator who is frequently in my classroom, so had multiple snapshots before they did the formal evaluation, I always felt very secure about what was going to happen on that formal evaluation, because I knew that administrator actually knew how I taught. The flip side of that was when they were very rarely in my classroom or did, the speed walkthrough, 10 seconds, got to look, and then we're out of there. They were not going to know how I actually taught when they did a formal observation, because they didn't really see what was happening in the classroom. And that is part of your culture. If you have a huge school and one or two administrators who are in charge of doing all of the observations, that's not going to happen the way that you think it is.
Well, it's not sustainable for anybody.
No. If you have smaller groups and you have teachers who get to sit in each other's classrooms, who get to talk as peers rather than one is a mentor-mentee situation, even a mentor and a mentee is not a horrible thing. I like those programs. But if that's only where you ever have that kind of feedback, there's always something vested in that and invested in that feels too heavy as the teacher. So then am I getting a true picture of what I'm doing? How am I feeling about this? How is that going to spill over to how I teach the kids?
Yeah. So Tom Vander Ark, who is part of the micro school movement, was quoted in this article. And he said, nobody has created a reliable framework other than closing schools and then reopening them. And so I thought, what would that reliable framework look like, where it could be different?
Good question.
I think we have pieces of the answer.
I do. And I really think it comes back down to what you'd said earlier, is what you get the people, the stakeholders, including the children in the community. What do they need? Here's what we've done before. I was part of a group that helped a school here before kind of try to do the small school academy thing. And the students that they included as stakeholders were students who already played the game of school very, very well, and for whom the game of school was beneficial.
Working.
right? Yeah, it was actually helping those kids to succeed. What I like to hear are the kids for whom regular school isn't always working. I want to know what would make school better for you. And of course, they're going to say recess, which they should, because recess often does, right? More free time. I want to be able to socialize with my friends more. But when you get into the nitty gritty of what they actually want for learning, is if they haven't already been done to by a system that says, here's what you're going to learn, if you could learn anything you want today, what would that look like? And you can go from there. You can still fit standards into all of those things. And it doesn't have to be the free for all that some people imagine. Yeah. It's what we do in our learner profiles.
Yes. And I was thinking, even realizing that when they say more recess or longer lunch, to really dig into what about that experience is working well for you or feels good for you, because it's the underlying, what is that doing for them, that is important. It's not, because I think if we just gave kids endless recess like they ask for, and we know this, it doesn't make them necessarily happier. They don't necessarily like school more, because that's not really the need that they're trying to meet. And so if we understand what's the need, is it movement? Is it novelty? Is it social time? Is it
a brain break?
Feeling seen, a brain break, being outside? Like, what about that is feeding something for them? What about lunch? And maybe it is, lunch is just too short. I don't have enough time to eat, and then I feel sick all afternoon, right? That's important information. But sometimes there's a bigger story that is not seen because we're taking it at surface level instead of really drilling down to understand what need are you trying to meet.
And how do those kids view learning in general? And how do the adults view learning in general? And I've often told adults, learning should not be equated to suffering. It shouldn't be hard just to make it worthwhile. We can talk about vigorous learning instead of rigorous learning.
Like that.
I think people know we are not fans of the word rigor, but when we look at
kittens
things that are
punched,
right, all the time, if we look at things that get kids excited about learning, and kids do actually get excited about learning, and it's not just because it's fun or exciting. There are things that you can put in front of a kid that is challenging, that you show them how to persevere when it gets too difficult, and what else could we do together, that you're supported. There are very few kids that don't want things to be challenging. They don't want to I go back to the video game analogy a lot, that there are very few kids who want to stay on level 1 and only play level 1 ever, right? They want it to be more difficult. They want to know how to do something that's different. So, and I'm not saying we should gamify learning at every step. What I do think is, if we listen to kids and think about how it is that learning is for them now compared to, and I say learning with air quotes, what part of that is working for them and what parts are not working, and how do we change and adapt the way that we approach learning so it doesn't feel like something we have to suffer through, because it shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't. And knowing that just because we ask the question doesn't mean that they're going to know how to answer it, because so many of them have been so stuck in school looks a certain way. And we've said in previous episodes, all of culture thinks school looks that way, from, the cartoons that we watch to the media to back to school ads, like all of the things are very specific about what school looks like. And so I know through projects that I've done with kids over the years, they don't always know what could be possible because they've never had the experience, and they're so locked into the way school and learning has been defined. So sometimes it's asking those questions a little differently, or digging in a little differently into like what interests you. What are you passionate? What do you do on the weekends when you don't have any homework and nobody's dictating your time? Like, what does that look like? Right. Sometimes it's asking the questions a little bit differently to really understand what it is they need, because when they've been locked in a system, and we've seen this during detox week and other times, when they've been so locked into school looks like this, they're like, well, maybe I'd have less homework, or maybe, and it's like, well, why would we have homework at all? What would you do if you didn't have homework? Or maybe we could use our notes on a test. And it's like, okay, well, what if there were no tests? What if we thought about that differently? Sometimes they're so locked in that they don't know how to frame it any differently.
For some kids, this was the thing I did not expect at Anastasis. All they wanted was a locker.
I know.
And you're like,
the bane of my existence. I'm like, why?
That's the thing, because it's such a rite of passage. And I have to think, like, if that's the thing that kids look forward to in school, and I'm not discounting that it's kind of a cool thing if you think about it in terms of traditional models of education. But if that's the sky for them, how limiting have we been in everything else as a society, that a locker is the pinnacle of reaching, middle school, right?
Yeah. Well, and then it's so funny when they actually get the locker and come back and are like, yeah, I never used that thing. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Like, I know.
My locker is clear on the other side of the building. I never have time to get to it. It's just so interesting that, again, a lot of times even kids who've not experienced traditional schooling still are stuck in the mindset of what's always been, rather than what could you have, what could you do?
Yeah.
That's
I always
the part
remember
that's
that part of the documentary, Most Likely to Succeed, when they were at Castleview and they were sitting with the student and the parent, and they're like, well, but does it have to be a grade? Why do you have to have a grade? And both of them very ardently like, well, maybe after college I can think like that, but right now it has to look like they were so rigid in their thinking. And again, we've created a culture that's made us that way. So it's not surprising necessarily, but it is a hard culture shift for some kids and families and teachers and all stakeholders.
We always laugh about some of the memes on the internet about how you were always told that this was going to go on your permanent record. And how many of you, you're in your 30s now. Do you know what your permanent record is? There's no such thing, right? And even like, as we have addressed in previous episodes, that the colleges and universities that people are so sure you have to have a really high GPA and a really high either SAT or ACT score.
Even that your transcript has to look a certain way. And you're like, no, they will literally take
that's not how that looks. And maybe certain schools, but it's almost as this given that people assume that that's the case, and they haven't done any research into, is that true?
Yeah.
Can I drive down the highway with my overhead light in my car on, or is that illegal? There are still people who don't know that because is it true?
Because
or is it just,
you had a parent going, turn that light off.
It's just been passed down.
Light on.
How many of these true facts have not been true at all, and they've just been handed down as, we used to call them old wives' tales, and now it's like, well, is that true? Is it urban legend? Is it something else? What kind of things are factual? And I know that's a really hard thing right now because the word facts and opinions mean different things in this weird kind of era that we're in.
It's getting real weird. Yeah.
And it's only going to get weirder. I have personally turned off every AI search in all of my search engines to make them a little bit more useful, because they were not at all for a while.
Not at all. You can also, I learned, do the minus sign in Google, minus AI, and it'll bring you non-AI, which is helpful because it's like the old Google that we all know and love.
I personally use DuckDuckGo now.
Version.
I really appreciate how DuckDuckGo works, and I'm able to use all my little Boolean characters in my search terms.
I was like, I haven't used it in a long time. DuckDuckGo, I forgot about.
But yeah, I feel like education is going to be one of these things that really start to separate. Again, we're going to see a much bigger gap, especially if our Department of Education goes away or is dismantled or whatever happens the next administration. I think we have a lot of unknowns in our midst. I think that's hard for adults. It's hard for kids, even if they don't understand any of that. So what we do in education and how we move forward has to be very intentional, very purposeful, in that we see each individual as not only capable of learning, but who can tell us about what they want to learn, how they learn, who they are, and how we value that. I don't think that we can do a whole lot more. There are a lot of things that are going to be out of our control. So we have, and I don't like that word control so much anyway, but the things that we can address and help, we need to really focus in those areas.
What I wish had happened and what I would like to see happen is for us to be better as a society. And I think this goes back to the research and development piece, to capture the biography of an idea. So not only you're not coming in and you're looking at something that someone's done and you're distilling it to the easiest thing to scale, but you're actually saying what all happened that made this idea that we're walking into work. What are all its components? What are all of its pieces? And really capture that so that when we are looking at how to make something scalable, we're taking into account the right components and the right pieces that made it work to begin with. And we're being more intentional about what it is that we're doing. It's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be easy. And I also think ideas that are working really well are hard to scale because we want to scale them in a very cookie cutter way instead of saying, can we scale the essence of the components of this idea that we're working for this community? Right?
It's so
what
funny.
Does that look like translated to this community?
It's so funny that you said it exactly that way, because that was exactly what I was thinking, is how the assembly line was a very innovative thing when it first happened, right? So the whole Ford automobile assembly line, that met a need for the time.
And it met it well.
And there are still situations and products that rely on an assembly line and even an assembly line mentality. Not everything that is good is scalable. Not everything that is good is measurable. And when we look at education, you cannot scale everything. You need to take the pieces and the parts that work for the group that are in front of you and make it work for them. And if the scalable part of the models are smaller classroom sizes, autonomy at the local level, autonomy for the students and the teachers, and whatever else, right?
Autonomy over budget.
Yes, it has to meet the needs of those kids.
And because this is how I'm writing right now, this is obviously how I'm thinking, but I don't think that there is a product that works for every community, but I do think there could be a process that works for every community. In other words, if the process is human-centered design, which is essentially what we're talking about, get to know the people in your community, design for that community. I do think there's a process that could work for everyone. Don't believe there's a product that's going to be the solve for everyone. And in this particular article that we read, the product was small is the way to do it. I think if they had looked at process of what was actually happening there and they had replicated the process that school went through to get to where they just made the decisions they made, I think that could work. I think that could be scalable in a different way, right? It's not the easy way to scale. But again, we're dealing in humanity, and humanity is not easy to scale for because we all serve different communities and different people.
Well, and when you look at the community needs, that also goes back to, we need a strong Department of Education that helps to ensure that there is an equitable education for every student, that discrimination, all of those things are dealt with in a way that is ensuring that the local control doesn't take over the needs of a majority. And ignores the rights of a few. So again, when you come back down to what's scalable, there are still some things that we need to have ensured at a very top level. But if you are always working with that top down, here's what you're going to do and here's what you have to do, cookie cutter assembly line style of education, that's never going to work.
And I also think that research and development has to be a bigger priority for education. And I think that the ratios of how that money is being spent is probably not correct within the education R&D. I think we need to look more at and amplify the voices more of what is working really well through that applied research, because so much of what gets done in education is research as if we are talking about a homogeneous group rather than saying, here's what worked for this group with these parameters, with this, and we don't get to see that when it's not the applied research. We don't get to hear the story in the context of how it unfolded. Again, that biography of an idea isn't there.
Yeah. There's a lot to think about. We don't have all of the answers for how to fix all of education, but I do think that, again, if you start looking at the individual child, that's the best place to start. Can I take a really selfish moment for a second? Quick segue.
Yeah.
The tech world lost a really good friend in Jennifer Wagner.
Yes.
Got to watch her memorial on Sunday, and every single person that spoke about Jen was just talked about her kindness, her goodness, how she was always willing to help, that she wasn't someone to complain. And I think about Jen and the community, because they also mentioned quite a bit, not only of her school community and her church community, but also her virtual community. They talked about that quite a bit at the memorial. And I was like, Jen was very intentional about keeping in touch with different people. And she knew a lot.
And building relationships with people. Yeah.
And that is the thing that I know, building a relationship, even if you don't get to talk to that person every single day, even if it's here and there. Jen was very, she was so good at that. But also that is the part that I take away from lessons I learned from Jen. There are a lot of tech things I learned from her, a lot of things about, how to think about ed tech in a different way. But the one thing I know is if you have a strong enough connection and you are intentional about building that, it doesn't matter if you haven't talked or if you haven't seen each other in person. I think I met Jen in person twice. The majority of our conversations were online, right?
It wasn't many times. Yeah.
Yeah. But I still would say she was one of my very good friends that I always knew was going to be there for the people in her communities regardless. And that's something that I'm like, okay, we can take that with. That is hard at a level where if you know thousands of people online, it is really hard to stay in touch with thousands of people. You and I have talked about how humans weren't built to have that many friends, right? Yeah. And you're always thinking, oh gosh, I didn't get to reach out as many times as I wanted to. But I think back to, okay, well, Jen made a point just every once in a while to shoot somebody a little message, little encouragement, or, hey, have you tried this new tool? I've been doing this. What do you think?
Yeah. And she was so good. She was the first blog I ever followed, TechnoSpud, back when she had TechnoSpud. But Jen, what I loved too is that she always thought beyond the kids in the classroom that she was teaching and looked at how do I connect globally and bring people in on a global fun project so that they can see really how we are all connected through like the Oreo project and different things that she did, that she was so good at inviting in and being really good at helping all of us think bigger than maybe what was right in front of us. So talk about like the biography of an idea. I think about how many people in our personal learning network that we really know almost exclusively online that so have shaped who you and I have become, but also what Anastasis became through the good questions they asked us, the way they thought, the articles they shared, the videos they shared. I don't know. We have so many to be grateful to, and Jen certainly left a big mark, I know, on both of us personally, but also in how we thought about educating kids.
Right. I had a project when I was teaching music in Omaha, and it was just like a little slideshare that back in the day when you could go and leave a little voice comment or a little video on it. And she was one of the people that would, without fail, I knew if I asked.
She did that for kids at Anastasis. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was just always one of those people who was so willing to help others in their learning journey. I will always be grateful to her for that. Always.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to shout you out, you are one of the most intentionally thoughtful people I think I've ever met.
Oh, thanks.
When Jen got moved to hospice, Michelle immediately, was like, let's inundate her with Christmas cards and figure out how to get those to her. And you're always very good at that. Like in our Anastasis community, you're always the one who is like, we got to remember, you're just very good at being intentional about those things.
Well, thank you. You are the person who I know I'm always going to get a nice little note from. It's funny
or
that like
meme or
right, but we laugh about these things, but these are those little touch points, the pebbles, and like there's a little
yep.
conversation about how penguins give each other pebbles, right? I
Yep.
always know that there are different ways of pebbling that people like to share of themselves, but it seems small, but those are the things that always make the biggest difference. Because you know that not only does someone know you and value and see you, but that you're in their thoughts. And there are often times when I feel very guilty, like, oh my gosh, I should be connecting with this person more and letting them know that in my thoughts. And I'm like, but there's also something to be said about just sending out that love into the universe, or whatever you might want to call it, letting people just even say, hey, I'm thinking of you. How meaningful that can be for a person. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes
I will say this, in the hardest year of maybe my life, I'm almost certain it was last year, the people who reached out, not even knowing what really was going on, and just were a lifeline, or they weren't even offering anything other than to just say, you're not alone. I'd love to meet up and let's just talk. I don't have to ask any questions. I mean, I had a friend who had also started a micro school that had to close, and met for coffee, and he just said, we don't have to talk at all about the school or what happened, because I know you're probably tired of answering those questions. And I remember being there and thinking, if I have to have one more conversation about this, and just the permission, we ended up talking about it, but just the permission that it was okay not to was so lovely. And I just think, again, back to the relationship piece, those moments of connection are really everything. And we've had it modeled really well to us. And we have seen firsthand the difference that it makes. I told you off camera or off mic that I had lunch the other day with one of our alums, happened to just run into her at Starbucks, and she's like, I'm here for a week. Let's have lunch. And just catching up with one of our OG students and hearing where her life is and how it's gone, and the success that she's found, and the things she's struggling with and grappling with, and decisions she's making. And it was so lovely just to sit and catch up and do that. But I think back to my own schooling, and I don't know that I had a teacher for most of my life that I would have connected with like that over, I might have said hi or waved or something, but to say, let's get lunch and catch up. And then to hear, as she learned that we're not open this year, to hear her reflections about her time at Anastasis. And she said, I thought I might be a one-off. And then I realized that I'm still in touch with all these people, and we all think the same way. And I can't be a one-off, because we all say the same things about our experience and how much it impacted us. And the truth is, if she was the only one, we still would have done it.
Right. Right. And here I thought that was going to be a segue, but it really does come back to what you said. It is about relationships and the small communities, even if it, spreads out to a slightly larger community, right? How important it is to be able to say, this is impacting me in a meaningful way because you know who I am. And that to me is why the schools who succeed in their own little communities do so, because they are intentional about seeing each individual as an individual and not just a piece of the puzzle, right? All those pieces of the puzzle have to interlock and fit together, but that I'm not free to move around on my own. Right. Whereas if I'm seen as this unique being that contributes, that grows within that model, everybody's important there. So it comes back to relationships every single time.
Every single time.
Yeah.
We say it over and over. Well, on that note, I am working on how to solve this from a different altitude, knowing that it's unlikely that we'll be able to open. We have looked at space, and as I said, things have changed in the last 14 years, and ways that we could be scrappy before are not true now from a code perspective. We don't get grandfathered in certain places the same way, as well as the timeline for permitting for those things are a little out of control. So looking at okay, well, what does that mean for how do we look at this from maybe a different altitude, knowing what we know and having had the experiences that we've had. And so I'll be interested to see how that starts to unfold and how our conversations morph as different things open up. But that article was good. And I think as you sent it, as you reposted it and quoted Nick, you were like, we have so many words about this. And as it turns out, we had a lot of words about it.
Yes, we did.
So it is, yeah, it's interesting being in a school where you're seeing it firsthand, what works really well, what doesn't, and then being connected to other schools and what the pain points are, what the breaking points are. And then again, like I said, working from the foundation side and trying to get money on that end, and it just feeling like such a slog, and like there's rules I clearly don't know, and and how is that sustainable, and all of those questions. I think the work that we have done and the work that we do is really important. And I think that the work that all these micro schools that I'm seeing close, and for various reasons, we've got to solve this for kids. We've got to get better at seeing really what it is that we're solving, and being more intentional about how we're thinking about solving it, so that it can be better for everyone. Because as it turns out, education affects all of us.
Right.
We care if these children are educated one day. It's going to impact all of us. There's none of us that are free from it. So why are we not making it the best we can? Why are we not putting more money to solve big problems? Because if we could get education more right, I think everything else becomes easier.
I mean, we think that, right?
Happen to. Yeah. Yeah. So with that said, you feel good?
I feel good.
All right. Onward.
Onward.
Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Education.